Let's go to our next panelist. Shari, why don't you fill us in on your program?
Sure. Is this mic working?
I don't hear it yet.
Mic check, mic. Nope.
There
we go.
There you go.
Oh, cool. I don't know what I did, but it worked. Okay. So the Carnegie Group actually was formed. I'll give you a little background so you understand what we did with NAR's consumer outreach campaign. Who's familiar with NAR's consumer campaign? Anyone seen it? Okay, so I'll give a little background so those who are not understand that. So the Carnegie Group is a think tank that was formed in 2006 as we sort of saw the beginnings of what we thought was a real estate bubble and the crash. And it was formed by some folks in the real estate and real estate finance industries who were really concerned and sort of at the end of their careers, kind of. I'm going to call myself that too, even though hair color hides it. But you know, people who are 50 and up who really want to start doing something that's a little more purposeful and mission driven but are still working. And so we created this think tank, and it has grown to over 300 members around the country, many of whom are in the real estate and real estate finance industry, and we work on projects that are paid projects for Freddie Mac, for example, or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, several financial institutions, NAR, but have a purpose. So most of our members are doing this. They could be doing other things, but they're doing this because they really care. So as it turns out, a lot of our members are subject matter experts in these areas. Many of them are people that you would know. So when NAR came to us and said we want to do this consumer-facing communications campaign, and our expertise is really in member-facing communications, you know, can you help us with this? The very first thing we did is we chose 10 members from different disciplines who we thought together would be able to really come up with a collaborative solution. So we needed people who had media experience in consumer-facing communications, folks who understood political-facing communications, because the last thing we want to do with our consumer campaigns is offend someone on Capitol Hill or in our local government, people with real estate and finance experience and so on. And the very first thing they did was come up with what they called the 4 pillars for a successful campaign. So I'm going to share, I only have 5 minutes, I'm going to share with you the first pillar, which I think is actually the most important one. And it kind of goes without saying, just like we're all here today, we recognize that consumer communications is different from our internal member communications, but the first pillar is credibility, because we have credibility as associations with our members. We sometimes assume and make the mistake of assuming that we have credibility with the general public. Unfortunately, a lot of members of the general public have had positive experiences with realtors. Unfortunately, a lot of them have not. And so when they receive a communication from someone in the real estate community, their first go-to is, oh, this is a realtor trying to sell me something, or this is someone who wants to generate a commission. And we need to overcome that. So we identified credibility as the most important component, because without that, your consumer initiative is not going anywhere. And a lot of consumers don't even know what a realtor association is. Obviously, we know that the landscape of consumer communications is very noisy. It's very difficult to gain that credibility, but it's very easy to lose it. And one other thing is that building that relationship with consumers is a real process. It's different than if there's a newly licensed member, for example, and they need to know about the post-licensing class or some other kind of training or certification, and you send out an email. You can be effective with that one email. With a consumer, it's a process. It's a relationship building process. So one of the reasons that I came here, I actually didn't speak until 7 a.m. this morning and now, but I flew out on Thursday night, is because I wanted to hear what everyone was doing and what seemed to be going smoothly and where there were some challenges. So I also have made some observations, which I'll share with you too, where I think we can kind of fine-tune as we move forward with the core standards. So one thing I've heard is that the people I've talked to are planning on doing their 4 consumer communications almost as separate activities, whereas in reality, if we're trying to build our credibility, it may make sense to look at those 4 communications as a process and have some kind of, you know, interwoven connection between those, so that you're building a credibility with your audience. So how did the Carnegie Group focus on NAR's credibility in the consumer outreach campaign? We did that in a couple of ways. Number one, the content. We used a variety of content. We used PSA-style videos, we used news videos, we used written content, graphical content. Those news videos were very important in the early stages, because when a consumer opened the email, what they were seeing was a video from CNBC or from Fox or from a national, you know, CBS, CNN, a national television news station with our spokesperson as the guest on that television segment on the topic that we were promoting that month. but they weren't seeing a communication from a realtor or from NAR. So right away there's a lot more, depending on your view of national news, there's a view of more credibility because it's coming from a third party. It means a lot more for someone, an anchor on the news, to be saying something positive about realtors or about a real estate issue than for a realtor to be sitting there and saying something great about themselves. We also used independent experts for the same reason. I mean, a realtor can sit on camera or go on a television interview and say how great they are, say how great real estate is, how realtors are the voice of real estate, how we're so involved in the community. But if an independent third party says that, it's way more credible from a consumer standpoint and way more compelling. So I think as part of these campaigns, it's a good idea to start building relationships with independent experts, subject matter experts, who can provide your association and your members with third-party validation. We also did that with the topics. So topic development is very important, and in the handout that we distributed today, there's a page with a sample of many different types of topics we've done content on that we felt may be appropriate for the different buckets of the core requirements here. So you want to think about that. If you're going to be doing a community involvement piece, for example, you're going to get way more value in terms of building credibility with consumers if it has something to do with real estate. So maybe do a Habitat for Humanity project instead of a food drive, because I mean a food drive is very nice, but frankly it really has nothing to do with building your credibility as real estate professionals. And the topics obviously have to be engaging. And then we also did that with the style of the video. I know small associations are going to have to find shared resources for this because video production can be expensive. But even the larger associations that I've talked to are saying, oh, well, we're going to do our own video production. We have our staff, blah, blah, blah. The problem with that is that's great when you're doing member communications. They're accustomed to seeing maybe your president or another realtor, you know, sitting on the camera and talking to them about some kind of issue. A consumer doesn't want to be talked to, and you're not going to be building credibility with a consumer by telling them something. You have to show consumers. And so the video production that's going to resonate in building credibility with consumers is very different, and it has to include B-roll, and it has to include you know, other people in there. It has to include great graphics and audio. And you know, even with most larger associations, it's not something that larger associations generally have access to. The third-party experts are also excellent to be editing in on that video. And I want to mention something else for anyone who is going to have members at mid-year. The Carnegie Group actually takes a couple hours at each year at mid-year, and we do shoot experts that we have in a library so that we can use them in future videos on relevant real estate topics. So if anyone wants to reach out and let me know if either yourself or your other staff members or GADs are great for this, or influencers within your association want to be on that video, we will use it in NAR's national campaign and others. So showing and not telling, I think, is very important. That also segues a little bit to what we were just talking about with the news, because the credibility needs to be built into the content, into the topics, also into the delivery. And I think in many instances, the news is appropriate. In many instances for consumer communications of the type that we're doing with the core standards, for example, community involvement, for example, a placemaking project, we've got to be really careful about whether that's news or not. Because frankly, you know, building a park bench is not news, and your association is going to lose credibility. I mean, trust me, these news producers, especially your local early morning news, which is where this is going to appear, I've seen local associations who actually pitched the latest MLS statistics on the morning of the Sandy Hook shooting. So I can promise you that producer is not calling that association again. We've got to be really careful how we deliver the communications to the consumers, what's really newsworthy or not. A lot of the people I've been talking to here have been telling me, well, we're going to do this and this and this, and it is really important. I mean, you know, if a tree falls in a forest, right, what's the point of doing a community activity if consumers aren't going to know about it? But the go-to answer, that assumption, if we want to build credibility, should not always be, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and then we're going to do a press release. Because the press aren't going to pick it up, and you may lose credibility with the press. So social media often is a better way to get that message out, maybe an event. My suggestion, if you want to build credibility with consumers and with the press, and in terms of the role of the press, is to actually involve them in your project. So for example, we've coordinated community telephone banks with the news station, because they get a lot of credibility, and then they'll actually cover the whole telephone bank during their morning news, and you can have 5 or 6 of your realtors, sitting there being on television for 3 hours rather than, a 3-minute segment, and you get a lot of mileage out of that. So reconsider the role of the media and how you're aligning yourself with them as partners can deliver a lot more credibility in front of consumers than just trying to pitch a segment that really is not, community involvement is not always news.